The grand ballroom sparkled under the glow of crystal chandeliers, casting warm light across hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. Kate stood near the entrance, her emerald gown flowing gracefully around her as she greeted dignitaries and officials with the practiced smile she had perfected over years of public service. The annual charity banquet was one of the most important events of the season, and everyone who mattered in London's social circle had gathered to support the Children's Hospital Foundation. William watched his wife from across the room, his heart swelling with pride as she charmed yet another group of potential donors. She had a natural gift for making people feel valued and heard, even in a room crowded with demanding personalities. He noticed how her hand occasionally drifted to her temple, a subtle gesture that most people would miss, but he knew her too well to ignore it. She had been working tirelessly for weeks, preparing for this event while managing their 3 children and countless other royal duties. The evening had started perfectly. Kate had given a moving speech about the importance of pediatric care, her voice steady and passionate as she shared stories of children whose lives had been transformed by the hospital's work. The audience had been captivated, hanging on her every word. Donations were pouring in, and the organizers were thrilled with the turnout. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned, but William noticed the small signs that others missed. The way Kate's smile seemed to require more effort as the evening progressed. How she gripped the back of a chair a moment too long when she thought no one was looking. The slight pallor beneath her carefully applied makeup. He had asked her that morning if she felt well enough to attend, and she had insisted she was fine, brushing off his concerns with her characteristic determination. She never wanted to let anyone down, especially not when so much was riding on an event like this. Kate moved through the crowd with grace, stopping to chat with elderly donors, kneeling down to speak with children who had been invited as guests of honor, and posing for countless photographs. Each interaction took energy she was struggling to maintain, but she refused to show any weakness. She had learned early in her public life that showing vulnerability was often seen as failure, and failure was not an option when so many people depended on her. The dinner service began, and guests took their seats at round tables adorned with white roses and flickering candles. Kate sat at the head table between a prominent businessman and a renowned surgeon, engaging them both in conversation about their respective fields. She barely touched her food, pushing the delicate portions around her plate while nodding attentively to the surgeon's detailed explanation of a new surgical technique. William, seated several chairs away, caught her eye and raised his eyebrows in a silent question. She gave him a reassuring nod, but he wasn't convinced. As dessert was being served, the event coordinator approached Kate with a request. One of the major donors wanted a private word, and several journalists were hoping for brief interviews. Kate agreed without hesitation, even though William could see the exhaustion settling deeper into her features. She excused herself from the table, smoothing down her gown and fixing her smile back into place. The next hour became a blur of handshakes, posed photographs, and carefully worded responses to reporters' questions. Kate's feet ached in her high heels, and the room seemed to be getting warmer with each passing minute. She had skipped lunch to handle a last-minute crisis with the seating arrangements, and breakfast had been nothing more than a quick cup of tea while helping their youngest get ready for school. The lack of food and rest was catching up with her, but she pushed through, determined to see the evening through to its conclusion. William finished his conversation with a group of hospital administrators and began making his way toward Kate. Something in his gut told him she needed him, even if she would never admit it. He had learned to trust these instincts over their years together. As he navigated through the crowd, offering polite nods and brief greetings, he kept his eyes fixed on his wife. Kate was standing near the stage, discussing the evening's success with the event organizer, when she felt the first wave of dizziness wash over her. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, which had suddenly become blurry at the edges. The voices around her seemed to fade in and out, as if someone was adjusting the volume on a radio. She placed her hand on the edge of a nearby table, trying to ground herself, but the room began to tilt in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne she hadn't touched. The event organizer was still talking, oblivious to Kate's distress, enthusiastically sharing the preliminary donation totals. Kate tried to focus on the words, to nod in the appropriate places, but her body was betraying her. Her legs felt like they were made of water, and a cold sweat had broken out across her skin despite the warmth of the room. She opened her mouth to excuse herself, to make it to a private room before anyone noticed something was wrong. But the words wouldn't come. William pushed past a group of guests, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. He could see Kate from behind, could see the unnatural stillness in her posture, the way her hand gripped the table edge. He quickened his pace, his heart beginning to race. Years of watching over her had taught him to recognize when she was reaching her limit, and every alarm in his system was going off. Kate's vision narrowed to a tunnel, the bright lights of the ballroom fading to darkness at the edges. She tried to take a step to move toward the exit, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The last thing she registered was the shocked expression on the event organizer's face, and the sensation of falling, as if the floor had suddenly disappeared beneath her feet. William broke into a run, his formal shoes sliding slightly on the polished marble floor. He saw her knees buckle, saw her body begin to crumple, and his only thought was to reach her before she hit the ground. The crowd seemed to part before him, though he barely registered their presence. His entire world had narrowed to the woman he loved, falling in what seemed like slow motion toward the unforgiving marble floor. William's arms wrapped around Kate just as her body went limp, catching her weight against his chest before she could hit the ground. The impact of catching her made him stagger backward, but he held firm, cradling her against him as gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. The elegant event that had been progressing so smoothly just moments before descended into chaos as guests rose from their seats, craning their necks to see what had happened. Time seemed to stand still as William lowered himself carefully to his knees, supporting Kate's unconscious form in his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her face pale and lifeless in a way that made his blood run cold. He pressed his fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse, and relief flooded through him when he found it, steady and strong beneath his trembling fingers. She was alive, just unconscious, but the fear that gripped his heart didn't loosen its hold. Security personnel materialized from the edges of the room, forming a protective circle around the couple. One of the guards spoke urgently into his radio, calling for medical assistance, while others worked to keep the growing crowd of concerned onlookers at a respectful distance. Camera phones were already emerging from pockets and purses, and William's protective instincts flared. Kate would hate for this moment to be plastered across social media and newspapers, but he couldn't think about that now. His only concern was her well-being. A woman pushed through the crowd, identifying herself as a doctor. William looked up at her with grateful eyes, carefully adjusting his position so she could examine Kate without him having to let go. The doctor's hands moved efficiently, checking Kate's pulse, lifting her eyelids to examine her pupils, and asking William rapid-fire questions about her medical history. Had she eaten today? Did she have any chronic conditions? Was she on any medications? Had she complained of feeling unwell? William answered as best he could, his voice tight with worry. He explained about the long hours of preparation, the missed meals, the relentless schedule she had been keeping. The doctor nodded knowingly, her expression sympathetic but professional. She called for water and asked someone to bring a chair, suggesting they move Kate somewhere more private where she could recover away from the staring crowd. Kate's eyelids fluttered, and a small moan escaped her lips. William's grip on her tightened instinctively, and he leaned down close to her ear, murmuring soft words of comfort. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused as she tried to make sense of her surroundings, the concerned faces hovering above her, the strong arms holding her, the marble floor cold beneath her. Embarrassment flooded through her as realization dawned about what must have happened. She tried to sit up immediately, but William held her still, his voice firm but gentle as he told her to stay put for a moment. The doctor agreed, explaining that she needed to take things slowly after fainting. Kate's cheeks flushed with color, though whether from embarrassment or returning blood flow, William couldn't tell. She looked up at him with apologetic eyes, and he could see her mentally calculating the damage this incident would cause to the event, to their reputation, to the foundation they were supporting. The event organizer hovered nearby, wringing her hands anxiously, asking if there was anything she could do to help. William asked her to clear a private room where Kate could rest, and the woman scurried off immediately, grateful to have a concrete task. Within minutes, a path was cleared through the crowd, and William helped Kate to her feet, keeping one arm wrapped securely around her waist. Her legs were shaky, and she leaned heavily against him, all pretense of strength abandoned in the face of her body's rebellion. They made their way slowly toward a small sitting room off the main ballroom, Kate's emerald gown trailing behind them as William practically carried her. The doctor followed, along with 2 security guards and a member of the event staff carrying a bottle of water and some crackers. Kate wanted to protest, to insist she was fine and could return to the banquet, but the words died in her throat when she tried to speak. Her body was making it abundantly clear that she had pushed too far this time. The sitting room was blessedly quiet and cool after the heat and noise of the ballroom. William settled Kate onto a plush sofa, propping pillows behind her back and draping a borrowed coat over her legs. She looked small and fragile in the oversized garment, so different from the poised and confident woman who had commanded the room earlier in the evening. The doctor knelt beside her, taking her blood pressure and asking more questions while William hovered anxiously nearby. After a thorough examination, the doctor delivered her verdict. Kate was severely dehydrated and exhausted, likely exacerbated by low blood sugar from not eating properly. There was no indication of anything more serious, but she needed rest, proper nutrition, and fluids. The doctor wrote out some recommendations on a piece of paper, emphasizing the importance of taking better care of herself, even with a demanding schedule. Kate nodded meekly, accepting the gentle scolding with grace. William thanked the doctor profusely, shaking her hand and ensuring she had their contact information in case they needed follow-up care. Once they were alone, except for a single security guard stationed discreetly outside the door, he sat beside Kate on the sofa, taking her hand in his. She looked at him with tears swimming in her eyes, and he pulled her close, letting her rest her head against his chest. She apologized repeatedly, her voice breaking with emotion. Sorry for causing a scene. Sorry for ruining the event. Sorry for not listening when he had asked if she was feeling well that morning. William stopped her litany of apologies with a gentle finger to her lips, telling her firmly that she had nothing to apologize for. She was human, not a machine, and even the strongest people had limits. He had been watching her push herself too hard for weeks, and he blamed himself for not insisting she slow down sooner. They sat in silence for several minutes, Kate sipping water and nibbling on crackers while William kept his arm around her shoulders. Outside, they could hear the muffled sounds of the banquet continuing, the event organizers doing their best to salvage the evening and refocus attention on the cause. William's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket with messages from concerned friends and family members who had already heard about the incident, but he ignored them all. Nothing was more important than the woman beside him. Kate's color was slowly returning, the healthy pink coming back to her cheeks as the water and food began to work their magic. She rested her head on William's shoulder, exhaustion weighing down every limb. She admitted quietly that she hadn't realized how run down she had become, how she had been operating on autopilot for so long that she had stopped listening to her body's warning signs. William kissed the top of her head, promising that things were going to change. They would hire more help, delegate more responsibilities, and establish better boundaries around their personal time. The drive home was quiet, the city lights streaming past the car windows in blurred streaks of color. Kate sat in the back seat beside William, wrapped in his jacket with her head resting against his shoulder. Their security detail had arranged for them to leave through a private exit, avoiding the media circus that had inevitably formed outside the main entrance. News of her collapse had already spread across social media like wildfire, with speculation ranging from pregnancy announcements to serious illness. William scrolled through his phone with a frown, reading the headlines that were already appearing on news websites. Most were respectful, expressing concern for Kate's health and well-being, but others were more invasive, with paparazzi photos capturing the moment she fell and dramatic captions designed to generate clicks. He made a mental note to have their press secretary release an official statement in the morning, something that would put the rumors to rest without revealing too much private information. Kate stirred beside him, opening her eyes to look out at the familiar streets of their neighborhood. Guilt still churned in her stomach when she thought about the evening's events. The banquet had raised significant funds for the children's hospital, but instead of celebrating that success, everyone was talking about her collapse. She worried about how it would affect future events, whether donors would hesitate to support causes she championed, whether people would see her as unreliable or weak. As if reading her thoughts, William squeezed her hand gently and told her to stop overthinking. The event had been a tremendous success, raising nearly double the expected amount in donations. The fact that she had worked herself to exhaustion in service of that cause only demonstrated her dedication, not her weakness. Most people, he reminded her, would admire her commitment rather than judge her for having human limitations. They arrived home to find their housekeeper had prepared a light meal and turned down the bed in their room. The children were already asleep, tucked safely in their beds after spending the evening with their grandmother. Kate felt a pang of longing to check on them, to kiss their peaceful sleeping faces. But William steered her gently toward their bedroom instead. There would be time in the morning to cuddle with them and reassure them that she was fine. Kate changed out of her elaborate gown, hanging it carefully in the closet before pulling on comfortable pajamas that felt like heaven after hours in restrictive formal wear. She washed her face, removing the layers of makeup that had masked her exhaustion earlier, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Without the armor of cosmetics and styled hair, she looked as tired as she felt, with dark circles under her eyes and a drawn quality to her features that spoke of too many late nights and early mornings. William appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. He told her she was beautiful, tired or not, and reminded her that she didn't have to be perfect all the time. She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence, and allowed herself to acknowledge just how exhausted she truly was. It had been building for months, this bone-deep weariness, but she had kept pushing it aside in favor of meeting everyone else's needs and expectations. They made their way to the bedroom where William had arranged the light meal on a small table by the window. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread with fresh fruit and herbal tea, but it looked like a feast to Kate's empty stomach. She realized with some shame that she couldn't remember the last proper meal she had eaten. Yesterday's lunch? The day before? The days had blurred together in a haze of obligations and commitments. As they ate, William asked her to talk about what had been going on, not just today, but over the past few months. At first, Kate was reluctant, not wanting to burden him with complaints or appear ungrateful for their privileged life. But he persisted gently, and slowly the words began to flow. She talked about feeling pulled in too many directions, about the pressure to be perfect in every role she played, about the guilt she felt when she had to choose between family and duty. She described how the charity work, which she genuinely loved, had become overwhelming with too many organizations requesting her patronage and too few hours in the day. She admitted that she often felt like she was failing at everything, giving each commitment only a fraction of the attention it deserved. The children's school activities, royal engagements, charity events, public appearances, and the countless behind-the-scenes work that nobody saw all competed for her limited time and energy. William listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned as she revealed the full extent of her struggle. When she finally fell silent, he reached across the table and took both her hands in his. He apologized for not seeing how much she had been carrying, for assuming she was coping because she always seemed so capable. He promised that they would sit down together and review all of her commitments, cutting back on anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Kate protested weakly that she couldn't just abandon her responsibilities, that too many people were counting on her. William countered firmly that she couldn't help anyone if she ran herself into the ground. Tonight's collapse was a warning shot, a sign that her body was reaching its breaking point. If she didn't make changes now, the next episode might be more serious. And he wasn't willing to risk her health for any cause, no matter how worthy. They finished their meal in thoughtful silence, Kate processing everything that had happened and everything that needed to change. Part of her resisted the idea of stepping back, of appearing to give up or fail, but another part of her, the part that had felt her legs give way and her vision fade to black, knew that William was right. Something had to change, and it had to start now. After clearing the dishes, they climbed into bed together. Kate settled against William's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He stroked her hair gently, and she felt some of the tension that had been coiled tight in her shoulders for months begin to release. She wasn't alone in this. She had never been alone, even when she felt isolated by the weight of expectations and responsibilities. William told her about his own experiences with burnout, times when the demands of public life had threatened to overwhelm him. He shared strategies that had helped him maintain balance, like scheduling regular downtime that was non-negotiable, learning to say no without guilt, and prioritizing the things that truly mattered over the things that merely seemed urgent. He reminded her that they were a team, and teams supported each other through difficult times. As sleep began to claim her, Kate felt grateful for the man beside her who had quite literally caught her when she fell. But more than that, she was grateful for his emotional support, his understanding, and his willingness to help her find a better path forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, including dealing with the media fallout and reassuring worried friends and family. But tonight, wrapped in William's arms and finally allowing herself to rest, she felt a glimmer of hope that things could get better. Morning sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, gentle and warm against Kate's face. She woke slowly, her body heavy with the kind of deep exhaustion that comes from months of inadequate rest finally catching up. For a moment she simply lay still, orienting herself and remembering the events of the previous evening. The memory of collapsing at the banquet made her cringe, but the embarrassment was tempered by the realization that she had slept more soundly than she had in weeks. William was already awake, sitting up in bed with his laptop balanced on his knees. He noticed her stirring and immediately closed the computer, setting it aside to give her his full attention. He asked how she was feeling, his eyes searching her face for signs of lingering distress. Kate considered the question honestly before answering. Physically, she felt better after a full night's sleep, though still tired. Emotionally, she was anxious about facing the day and dealing with the inevitable fallout from last night. Before they could discuss it further, 3 small figures burst through the bedroom door, pajama-clad and full of concerned energy. Their children had clearly been briefed about their mother's collapse, and they clambered onto the bed with a mixture of worry and relief. The youngest buried her face in Kate's shoulder, while the older 2 peppered her with questions. Was she sick? Did she have to go to the hospital? Was she going to be okay? Kate hugged them close, assuring them that she was fine, just very tired, and that she would be staying home to rest today. The children's presence lifted Kate's spirits immediately. Their innocent concern and unconditional love reminded her of what truly mattered. Her daughter asked if it was because Mommy worked too much, a perceptive observation that made Kate and William exchange meaningful glances. Out of the mouths of babes, William murmured, ruffling his daughter's hair affectionately. Kate promised her children that she would be more careful about taking care of herself, and they seemed satisfied with this assurance. After breakfast together as a family, William suggested that Kate stay in bed while he handled the morning's business. Their press secretary was waiting to discuss the official statement about last night's incident, and several family members had called expressing concern. Kate reluctantly agreed, knowing that William was better equipped to handle the diplomatic aspects while she recovered. She also knew that her presence might complicate matters, as she would feel obligated to downplay the seriousness of her exhaustion. Left alone with her thoughts, Kate reached for her phone for the first time since the previous evening. The screen was filled with notifications, hundreds of messages from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances expressing concern and well wishes. She scrolled through them slowly, touched by the outpouring of support but also overwhelmed by the number of people who felt entitled to updates on her health. She drafted a brief message to her closest friends, thanking them for their concern and assuring them she was recovering well. The news coverage was harder to stomach. While most outlets were respectful, some had taken the opportunity to speculate wildly about her health, her marriage, and her ability to handle her responsibilities. One particularly sensational article suggested that the stress of public life was too much for her, questioning whether she was suited for the role she had married into. Kate felt anger flare in her chest at the unfairness of such criticism, but she forced herself to close the browser and set the phone aside. William returned an hour later with a tray containing her favorite lunch and a satisfied expression. The press statement had been well received, he reported, striking the right balance between transparency and privacy. It acknowledged that Kate had fainted due to exhaustion and dehydration, thanked the medical staff and attendees for their concern, and confirmed that she would be taking a short break to rest and recover. Most importantly, it emphasized that the banquet had been a tremendous success for the Children's Hospital Foundation. The family doctor arrived shortly after lunch to conduct a thorough examination. Kate submitted to the tests with good grace, answering questions about her diet, sleep patterns, stress levels, and overall health. The doctor was kind but firm in her assessment, Kate was suffering from burnout and physical exhaustion, conditions that wouldn't improve without significant lifestyle changes. She prescribed rest, better nutrition, regular exercise, and most importantly, a reduction in her workload. The doctor's words carried weight, coming from a trusted professional rather than a concerned spouse. Kate found herself actually listening, really hearing what was being said instead of automatically dismissing concerns about her well-being. The doctor shared stories of other high-achieving women she had treated for similar issues, normalizing Kate's experience and removing some of the shame she felt about reaching her breaking point. Before leaving, the doctor scheduled a follow-up appointment and made Kate promise to take her recommendations seriously. That afternoon, Kate and William sat down together with their calendars and a detailed list of all Kate's commitments. Going through each one, they discussed what was truly essential versus what she felt obligated to do out of guilt or expectations. It was a revealing exercise. Kate was surprised to discover how many activities she had agreed to without really wanting to, simply because she felt she should, or because saying no seemed impossible. Some commitments were easy to eliminate. Several charity galas where her presence was requested but not crucial could be handled by sending donations and written support instead. A few patronages that had become more demanding than rewarding needed to be respectfully ended, with recommendations for other suitable patrons. Regular appearances at certain events could be reduced from monthly to quarterly. With each item they crossed off or modified, Kate felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Other decisions were harder. Kate was passionate about early childhood education and mental health initiatives, and she struggled with the idea of scaling back her involvement even temporarily. William suggested that she could remain involved in strategic planning and advocacy without attending every single event or meeting. Technology could help her stay connected to causes she cared about without the physical demands of constant travel and public appearances. They also discussed delegation and building a stronger support team. Kate had been reluctant to rely too heavily on staff, feeling that she should handle things personally to maintain authenticity and connection. But William helped her see that having trusted assistants to manage logistics, communications, and scheduling would actually allow her to be more effective in the areas where her personal involvement mattered most. Quality over quantity, he reminded her. By evening, they had a revised schedule that looked dramatically different from the previous one. Kate would take the next 2 weeks completely off to rest and spend time with family. After that, she would return to a reduced schedule, focusing on her core passions while maintaining better boundaries around her time and energy. They would reassess in 3 months to see if further adjustments were needed. Sitting together on the couch that evening, children playing quietly nearby and the day's difficult decisions behind them, Kate felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace. The path forward was clearer now, and while she knew there would be criticism and pushback from some quarters, she also knew that her health and well-being had to come first. She couldn't pour from an empty cup, couldn't be there for the causes and people she cared about if she didn't take care of herself first. The first week of Kate's recovery was harder than she had anticipated, though not in the ways she expected. Physically, she felt stronger each day as proper rest and nutrition restored her depleted reserves. The dark circles under her eyes faded, color returned to her cheeks, and the constant headache that had become her baseline finally disappeared. But mentally and emotionally, stepping back from her responsibilities proved to be a significant challenge. Kate woke each morning with the ingrained habit of checking her schedule, only to remember that her calendar was intentionally empty. The absence of obligations created an uncomfortable sense of purposelessness that she hadn't prepared for. Who was she if she wasn't constantly working, achieving, contributing? The question nagged at her during quiet moments, revealing how much of her identity had become wrapped up in productivity and external validation. William noticed her restlessness and gently suggested activities that would help her reconnect with herself beyond her public roles. They started taking morning walks together through the private gardens, something they had once done regularly but had abandoned as schedules became too packed. The simple pleasure of walking hand in hand, discussing everything and nothing, reminded Kate of their early years together before duty and obligation had crowded out spontaneity and leisure. She also began spending more unstructured time with their children, not rushing through homework help or bedtime routines, but actually being present for the small moments. baking cookies together on a Tuesday afternoon, reading stories without checking her watch, playing board games that lasted hours and dissolved into giggles and friendly competition. She realized with a pang how many of these moments she had missed while focusing on the bigger picture, and she vowed not to let that happen again. However, the rest didn't come without complications. Despite the official statement and doctor's orders, some members of the public and press questioned whether Kate was truly exhausted or simply shirking her duties. Online comments ranged from supportive to scathing, with some suggesting she should resign from her roles entirely if she couldn't handle them. Kate tried not to read the criticism, but it was impossible to completely avoid, and each harsh word stung more than she wanted to admit. William was fiercely protective during this period, and he made sure their communications team pushed back against particularly unfair coverage. He gave an interview where he spoke candidly about the pressures of public life and the importance of mental and physical health, using their situation as a teaching moment. His openness surprised many people and sparked important conversations about burnout, particularly among women who felt pressure to do it all without complaint. Kate received hundreds of letters during her recovery period, not just from well-wishers but from women who shared their own stories of pushing too hard and paying the price. Young mothers juggling careers and families, executives facing impossible demands, caregivers burning out while looking after others. The common thread was clear. Women everywhere were struggling with the same impossible standards and lack of support that had led to Kate's collapse. Reading these letters gave Kate a new sense of purpose. Perhaps her very public breakdown could serve as a catalyst for broader change. She began drafting ideas for a new initiative focused on sustainable achievement and work-life balance, particularly for women and mothers. It would take time to develop properly, but the seed of the idea energized her in a way that felt healthy rather than compulsive. The second week brought new challenges as Kate began the difficult process of actually implementing the boundaries she had set. A major charity event she had declined sent multiple follow-up requests, each message emphasizing how crucial her presence was and how disappointed everyone would be by her absence. Kate felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation, the voice in her head insisting that she should just push through, that one more event wouldn't hurt. William found her staring at the request, conflict written across her face. He reminded her gently that this was exactly the pattern they were trying to break. Her presence at one event wouldn't make or break the charity's success, but consistently overriding her boundaries would definitely break her health again. Kate took a deep breath and drafted a polite but firm decline, suggesting alternative ways she could support the event without attending in person. Hitting send felt both liberating and terrifying. Similar situations arose throughout the week. An invitation to speak at a conference on a topic she was passionate about. A request for her patronage from a new organization doing important work. A friend asking if she could attend a fundraiser. Each opportunity was genuine and worthwhile, which made saying no feel selfish and wrong. But Kate was learning to distinguish between what was important and what was urgent, between what genuinely required her involvement and what would be fine without her. She worked with a therapist recommended by her doctor, someone who specialized in helping high-achieving individuals establish healthier relationships with work and success. The sessions were challenging, forcing Kate to confront uncomfortable truths about why she found it so hard to rest, why she needed external validation, and why she struggled to believe she was enough without constant achievement. The therapist helped her see patterns that had been forming since childhood, expectations internalized so deeply that they felt like truth. One breakthrough came when the therapist asked Kate what advice she would give to her daughter if she were in a similar situation. Kate's answer came immediately and passionately. She would tell her daughter that her worth wasn't determined by productivity, that rest was not laziness, that saying no was not selfishness, and that taking care of herself was not optional but essential. The therapist gently pointed out the double standard Kate was applying to herself versus what she would want for someone she loved. William joined Kate for one therapy session where they discussed their relationship, dynamics, and how they could better support each other. They acknowledged patterns where Kate had been carrying too much alone, reluctant to burden William with her struggles. They committed to more open communication and regular check-ins about how they were both managing stress and responsibilities. It wasn't just Kate's challenge to solve, but something they needed to navigate together as partners. As the 2 weeks drew to a close, Kate felt different in ways that were hard to articulate. She wasn't completely healed or transformed, and she knew the journey toward sustainable balance would be ongoing, but she had gained tools, insights, and most importantly, permission to prioritize her well-being without guilt. She had learned to recognize the early warning signs of burnout and had strategies for addressing them before reaching crisis. The night before she was scheduled to return to a modified schedule of commitments, Kate and William sat together reviewing what she had learned and how she wanted to move forward. She had a list of non-negotiables: family dinners at least 4 nights per week, one completely unscheduled day every week, regular exercise that she enjoyed rather than endured, and monthly check-ins to assess whether her schedule was sustainable. William added his own requirement, that he had veto power if he saw her sliding back into old patterns. Kate agreed, understanding that accountability would be crucial. She also acknowledged that she might slip up, that old habits died hard, and that she would need grace for herself when she struggled. William assured her that he would be there to catch her, not just physically but emotionally too. They were a team, and teams lifted each other up when one was struggling. Kate stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her outfit for her first public appearance since the collapse. 3 weeks had passed, and while she felt nervous about returning to the spotlight, she also felt fundamentally different from the exhausted woman who had fainted at the banquet. This time she wasn't wearing armor to hide behind. She was simply herself, rested and ready to engage with the world on healthier terms. The event was a small one by design, a visit to the children's hospital that had benefited from the controversial banquet. Kate had specifically requested something low-key for her return, wanting to ease back into public life rather than jumping into the deep end. The hospital staff had been understanding and welcoming, excited to show her the new wing that donations from the banquet had helped fund. It felt right to return to where everything had started. William drove her to the hospital, a small gesture that meant everything. In the past, they had often arrived separately at events due to scheduling conflicts, but now they were being more intentional about supporting each other. He wouldn't be staying for the visit, but he would be waiting to drive her home afterward. The simple act of coordinating their schedules to make this possible felt like a victory in itself. The visit exceeded Kate's expectations in the best way possible. She spent an hour touring the new pediatric wing, meeting with young patients and their families. The interactions felt genuine and unhurried, without the constant awareness of a packed schedule waiting for her. She could linger over conversations, really listen to the stories being shared, and be fully present in each moment. Several families mentioned having followed her recovery journey, and they expressed appreciation for her openness about struggles and self-care. One mother pulled Kate aside and thanked her quietly for showing that it was okay to not be okay. She explained that watching someone successful and admired struggle with burnout had given her permission to address her own exhaustion and ask for help. That conversation alone made all the discomfort of the past weeks worthwhile. Kate realized that her collapse, while embarrassing at the time, had inadvertently opened important dialogues about sustainability and self-care. After the hospital visit, Kate attended a brief meeting with the foundation organizers to discuss the banquet aftermath. She had been dreading this conversation, worried about their disappointment or frustration with how the evening had ended. Instead, they greeted her warmly and shared incredible news. The publicity around her collapse, while initially concerning, had actually generated additional donations and awareness. People who hadn't attended the banquet had been moved by the story and wanted to contribute to the cause. More significantly, several corporate sponsors had reached out expressing interest in supporting not just the children's hospital, but also initiatives around burnout prevention and mental health in high-stress professions. The foundation was exploring the possibility of creating a new program focused on healthcare worker wellness, inspired by Kate's experience. Tragedy had somehow transformed into opportunity, demonstrating that vulnerability could be powerful when channeled constructively. Over the following weeks, Kate settled into her new routine. The modified schedule felt strange at first, with gaps that had previously been filled with back-to-back commitments. But gradually, those gaps became treasured spaces for rest, reflection, and connection. She had coffee dates with friends she had neglected during her busiest periods. She took up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned years ago. She discovered that having breathing room in her life didn't make her less productive but actually made her more effective. In the areas where she focused her energy, the boundaries she had set were tested regularly. Invitations still poured in, opportunities that sounded exciting and causes that truly mattered. But Kate had learned to evaluate each request against her priorities and capacity, rather than simply saying yes out of obligation. Some weeks this meant declining wonderful opportunities. Other times it meant accepting engagements but negotiating terms that worked better for her schedule and energy levels. Not everyone understood or approved of her new approach. Some critics continued to suggest she wasn't pulling her weight, comparing her reduced schedule to other public figures who maintained more demanding commitments. There were moments when Kate felt defensive or guilty, old patterns of thinking trying to reassert themselves. During those times, she would revisit the list of priorities she had created with William and her therapist, grounding herself in what truly mattered rather than external opinions. The real test came 6 months after the collapse when she was invited to chair a major initiative on early childhood education, one of her core passions. The position would involve significant responsibilities, extensive travel, and high visibility. The old Kate would have accepted immediately without considering the cost. The new Kate asked for time to think, discussed it thoroughly with William, and evaluated how it would fit within her sustainable schedule. After careful consideration, Kate accepted the position but with conditions. She would co-chair with another advocate, sharing the workload and responsibilities. Travel would be limited to 1 week per month maximum. Meetings would be scheduled to accommodate family commitments, and she would have authority to delegate tasks and build a strong team rather than trying to handle everything personally. The organization agreed to her terms, setting a precedent for how such roles could be structured more sustainably. As autumn arrived and the anniversary of the banquet approached, Kate reflected on how much had changed in a year. The woman who had collapsed under the weight of impossible expectations had transformed into someone who understood that sustainable impact required sustainable practices. She still worked hard and cared deeply about her causes, but she had learned to work smart rather than working constantly. The children noticed the difference most clearly. Their mother was more present, more patient, and genuinely available rather than physically present, but mentally elsewhere. Family dinners happened regularly, without work emails interrupting or early morning commitments cutting conversations short. Weekend activities were protected time, sacred space that wasn't sacrificed for last-minute obligations. The children thrived in this environment, and so did Kate's marriage to William. William himself had been transformed by the experience too. Watching Kate struggle and nearly break had forced him to examine his own relationship with work and duty. He became more proactive about protecting their family time, and more willing to say no to commitments that would compromise their well-being. They had become true partners in maintaining balance, holding each other accountable and supporting each other when old patterns threatened to resurface. On the actual anniversary of the banquet, Kate and William attended a small celebration at the Children's Hospital to mark the completion of the new wing. Standing in the bright, cheerful space that donations had created, Kate felt overwhelming gratitude. Gratitude for the work that had been accomplished, for the children who would benefit from this facility, but also for the painful lesson that had taught her about her own limits and the importance of self-care. During her speech at the celebration, Kate spoke honestly about the journey from collapse to recovery. She thanked William for catching her, both literally and figuratively. She acknowledged the difficulty of changing ingrained patterns and the ongoing nature of maintaining balance. And she encouraged everyone listening, especially the women who felt pressure to be everything to everyone, to prioritize their own well-being as seriously as they prioritized serving others. As they drove home that evening, Kate reached over and squeezed William's hand. She knew challenges would continue to arise, that maintaining healthy boundaries would always require vigilance and effort, but she also knew she wasn't facing those challenges alone. She had learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, that rest wasn't laziness, and that taking care of herself enabled her to better care for others. The collapse that had seemed so catastrophic at the time had actually been a gift, forcing a necessary reckoning and creating space for a more sustainable and fulfilling life. For that, despite everything, she was grateful.